Welcome back to another episode of Employment Law After Hours. We're super excited to have you here today as we're going to discuss the CMS vaccine mandate, its rules and regulations, and the new timelines for implementation. But before I get started, I do have to say the team at Employment Law After Hours is so grateful for all of you and all of our new viewers that we've gained over the last week and a half. We are one of the fastest growing employment law channels on YouTube, and we have you to thank for that. We hope you stick around for much more content that is to come from Employment Law After Hours. Before we get started into today's discussion on the CMS vaccine mandate, I think we need to summarize where we're at. As many of you know, last week the U.S. Supreme Court removed the injunction on the enforcement of this vaccine mandate for most of the country. This means that for 49 states, we're going to exclude Texas for now, but for 49 states, the vaccine mandate is in effect and can be enforced. This mandate states that for certain healthcare providers that we're going to discuss today, they must implement policies that require their employees to receive one of the 3 vaccines that are currently available on the market. Now, because of this recent decision from the Supreme Court, the enforcement dates have changed. First, starting with the 24 states that were not subject to the nationwide injunction, the first date that your employees must be vaccinated by is January 27th, 2022. This January 27th date is also the date for applicable healthcare providers to implement their policies regarding the vaccine mandate. So you must have that policy in place by January 27th. Thereafter, for those first 24 states, you must have your employees receive their second dose by February 26, 2022. Those dates are quickly approaching with the policy and first dose deadline within 2 weeks from the publishing of this video. For the other 25 states, excluding Texas, the dates have changed because of the Supreme Court's decision. Your employees and the date in which you must have your policy in place is February 14th, 2022. Your employees must then receive their second dose by March 15th, 2022. Since the Supreme Court's decision, we have received many questions from our clients. Therefore, I think it's best if I go ahead and run through the commonly asked, frequently asked questions that are published by CMS. Again, before I get started, this is not legal advice. I'm not your attorney yet. However, if you are in a jurisdiction or a state where we have an attorney or an office, we may be able to assist you. Feel free to reach out in the comments below or to us directly. So as you will see, I have on the screen now the frequently asked questions that are published by CMS. We're going to go ahead and run through these questions now in hopes that we can answer some of the lingering questions that many healthcare providers have regarding the CMS vaccine mandate. As you'll see right off the bat, CMS addresses when the mandate takes effect and when enforcement can begin. I do not believe that these frequently asked questions have been updated to conform to the Supreme Court's decision last week. Therefore, the dates that I provided earlier in this episode are what are going to apply. The next question I want to address is whether this is a facility policy or an employee/individual policy. As CMS answers, as identified on the screen, this is a facility level policy. However, employees, volunteers, interns, licensed practitioners, everyone within that facility who does not work remotely 100% of the time is going to have to abide by the CMS vaccine mandate and will have to receive that vaccine if they have not done so already. Obviously, we're going to get into it. There are a couple accommodations and exemptions that can be provided to certain employees, as we'll discuss, but by and large, keep in mind this is going to apply to all employees, interns, volunteers, licensed practitioners, etc., who work within that facility. Next, the CMS vaccine mandate does not apply to all healthcare provider types. It only applies to a limited subset of healthcare providers. So if you work in like a physician office alone, this policy is not going to necessarily apply to you. However, included on the screen now, CMS has provided a list of the healthcare facilities to which this vaccine mandate applies. If you believe you may fall into one of those descriptions of facility types, you'll want to get with your healthcare or employment attorney to discuss whether, 1, the vaccine mandate applies to you, and 2, if so, going about getting that policy implemented. Which staff does this apply to? CMS answers that question. It applies to your interns, your employees, your licensed healthcare providers. It applies to other individuals such as volunteers who may be within the facility but aren't necessarily employed by the facility. Again, it will not apply to, as stated in the frequently asked questions now, to the employees who work 100% remotely or away from that applicable facility. Those employees will not have to receive the vaccine. In addition, when looking at those provider types to which this policy applies, it's important to note that conditions of participation, conditions of coverage are a prerequisite for those facilities to have to abide by the CMS vaccine mandate. Again, it's kind of a complicated analysis as to who applies, so you'll want to have that answered from your trusted legal advisor. Another question we often get is whether this vaccine mandate applies to physicians who have admission privileges to that facility but are not necessarily employed by that facility. The answer is yes. If you have an outside physician who's coming to a facility to perform services, they're going to have to abide by the CMS vaccine mandate as well. It's going to be the facility's responsibility to ensure that those admission privileged physicians and providers are abiding by the vaccine mandate. In addition, as provided in the frequently asked questions, the mandate also applies to pharmacists who go on site to applicable facilities. So in some cases, you'll have pharmacies that employ pharmacists who primarily work in a brick and mortar establishment, but in some cases they may actually go to a facility to drop off medications or answer medication questions. If they're going into an applicable facility, they're going to have to be vaccinated as well. Finally, does this vaccine mandate apply to visitors? This is one of the biggest questions we've been getting. The answer is squarely no. This only applies to employees, interns, volunteers, licensed providers who are there to treat patients or otherwise employed by the facility. It's not going to apply to those non-employee visitors to the facility. But as stated in the regulations, it will apply to contractors who regularly come to the facility to perform contractor services. Those could be plumbers, those could be painters, etc. If there's kind of patients in that area, in that facility, then they're going to have to be vaccinated as well. That's going to be one of the more difficult pieces of this mandate to enforce. Next, I want to move on to the question of how does CMS define fully vaccinated under the policy? At this time, it's 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson or 2 doses of the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines. Right now, it does not include booster vaccination shots. So at this time, you do not need to enforce your employees getting boosters unless you would like to do so independent of this mandate. This may change in the future as CMS is reserved to do, but at this time, boosters are not included in the definition of fully vaccinated. Next, CMS has provided analysis on the documentation requirements for the vaccine. Essentially, if CMS or the accrediting individuals who come onto the facilities to do inspections ask for documentation of compliance, they're going to be looking for records to establish that all of your employees are vaccinated. That's going to include, essentially photocopies of your employees' vaccine cards. So you're going to want to make sure you get those on file and stored in accordance with the ADA, which states they must be stored in an area, that's not the employee's individual personnel file. It's a separate file, separate and distinct from the traditional employee documents. A lot of people are also tracking these via a spreadsheet. Essentially, they're going through and they're putting all their employees on a spreadsheet. They're putting, do we have the vaccine proof as one column, and they're putting the vaccination dates as another column to ensure compliance. And then obviously, if an employee has an exemption, that would be documented as well. For more detail regarding the documentation requirements, you should definitely check out the FAQ section that's published by CMS. There's a lot of details there. Next, does the vaccine mandate require testing of your unvaccinated staff? Well, first you might be saying, well, if the vaccine mandate applies to everyone, how is their unvaccinated staff? This would be for those individuals that have exemptions, disability, or religious. CMS is stating that no, they are not requiring testing at this time. Essentially, it'd be masks and social distancing, staying home if they have symptoms, etc. Those are going to be the precautions that those individuals would have to take. But at this time, they are not requiring testing. Again, this is a little bit of a divergence from the OSHA ETS that we've been discussing in the last couple of weeks that was overturned by the Supreme Court just last week. So moving into exemptions, which exemptions are allowed? Disability exemptions are permitted if certified by a healthcare provider. In addition, religious exemptions are provided as long as there are sincerely held religious beliefs. CMS is stating that these exemptions should be enforced in accordance with the EEOC guidance. So you'll want to check out that guidance and get with your trusted legal advisor for more information on how to evaluate and enforce those exemption requests. There's a lot of detail and a lot of analysis that goes into approving or disapproving such requests, and it has the potential to have great legal significance and liability if it's not correctly done. So definitely get with a trusted legal advisor to have that analysis conducted for you or to seek best practices on performing those analyses. So moving back into what do you do with the unvaccinated staff who have exemptions? What are the additional rules for them? Again, CMS is stating they should continue to wear masks, and they should continue to social distance, symptom check every day if they're not already doing so, and staying home if they have those symptoms of COVID-19. However, at this time, testing, again, is not required of those employees unless individual facilities and employers would like to implement such testing requirements. Next, I would like to spend a few moments discussing the enforcement of the vaccine mandate. CMS has stated, as included in its frequently asked questions, that the state survey agencies will be responsible for enforcement primarily. So when they're going on site to handle recertifications or initial certifications, they'll want to check for compliance. Also, they could come to facilities on a complaint from an existing employee and check for that documentation to ensure compliance. I want to touch on that for a moment. As we've discussed with the OSHA ETS, whistleblowers could be a primary way that CMS finds out about noncompliance. If you have a vaccinated employee who's disgruntled that his employer is not enforcing the CMS vaccine mandate, they may be able to pick up the phone, call that state agency, and have those auditors come out to check for compliance. So when it comes to enforcement, what happens if a state agency determines that a facility is not in compliance? Well, they have 3 different warning levels that they can utilize as provided in the frequently asked questions. For the most part, as stated by CMS, they're going to be given a period of time, even if they are given that worst or most severe warning level, to remain in compliance. However, you have about 23 days to get into compliance, as stated by CMS. If you're found to be a most severe violator, it would not be possible to get all your staff fully vaccinated within 23 days unless they're all getting Johnson & Johnson. So you'll definitely want to, again, make sure that this is moving quickly. You're getting this implemented before any state agency comes down with any sort of enforcement. Once warnings are issued, if compliance is not returned or compliance is not immediately had, CMS may begin that step of removing that provider from reimbursement privileges under Medicare and Medicaid. As Medicare and Medicaid are high revenue sources for most healthcare providers, again, this compliance cannot be stated enough. That's why we really appreciate you sticking around today as we discuss the CMS vaccine mandate. Again, we're going to have a future episode on religion and disability accommodations, so definitely subscribe so you receive notification of when we publish that episode. Again, we really appreciate you staying tuned to our channel. We hope you all have a great rest of your day.